everybody. Welcome to Change Festival for Rise Up to Reconnect. And I'm joined here by an excellent panel of guests. Thank you so much for coming here and being with us today. I'm going to share a little bit about each person that we have present on the panel. And then I will remind us of the theme of Reconnect and why this is important at this time. So we have Alan Lane with us. Alan is Artistic Director of Slung Glow, directing shows in partnership with many of Britain's theatres and places, as wide-ranging as the National Theatre of Croatia, a sari shop in Manchester, Buckingham Palace, and in a village in Purulia, southern India. In 2019, Slung Glow took over management of the oldest working men's club in Britain, the Holbeck in South Leeds. They run this as a venue, as a pay-what-you-decide creative and community space. During the COVID crisis of 2020, the company was the ward lead for Holbeck and Beeston for social care referrals, with responsibility for 7,500 homes, delivering 15,000 food parcels. Thank you for coming, Alan. And next to Alan, we have Kim Polman, a polyglot and a public speaker who is an avid advocate of a modern version of the Golden Rule: treat others and the planet as you wish to be treated. On this very philosophy, she co-created Imaginal Cells, Visions of Transformation, a collection of essays from thought leaders addressing the most pressing issues of our time, which led to co-founding Reboot the Future Foundation. Kim is also co-founder and chair of the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust, a charity dedicated to improving literacy for blind and visually impaired children in Africa. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Hannah Fitchett. Hannah is a social anthropologist researching Extinction Rebellion activism for her PhD at the University of St Andrews. As an Extinction Rebellion activist herself, Hannah takes an activist approach to her research. She explores how engagement in Extinction Rebellion activism influences people's perceptions of nature and humans' connections to it, in order to gain insight so that we can support a broader shift in perceptions of nature. Hannah's background in the charity sector, supporting social change through global education, her research on eco-anxiety as part of a research team at the University of St Andrews, and her personal experiences as a climate activist all inform her conviction that changing perceptions of nature is crucial for effective, socially just climate action. My name is Amisha Ghadiali, and I'm the host of a podcast, The Future is Beautiful, and a platform for inner and outer change. And this event is brought to you by Reboot the Future and Change Festival. So, excuse the paper rustling. When you print on both sides, it's better for the environment, but slightly messier, slightly messy for the host. Rise up to reconnect. We have long been championing a narrative of individualism, survival of the fittest, and every man for themselves. This illusion was shattered during COVID when it became clear that without all members of society, the health workers, the growers, the shopkeepers, the delivery drivers, not to mention loved ones, we cannot survive. We are an interconnected ecosystem, bound to a local and global community in infinite ways. Not only are we interconnected with each other, this is actually the secret to humans' rapid evolution. History shows us that it is our collaboration, not competition, that has been our greatest force. How can we now reconnect with each other in our community, across generations and across borders and ideologies, to rise up to meet this moment together? And how can we reconnect with the natural world, or to a greater web of consciousness, to truly realize the power of unity? So normally I would start the conversation by us taking a few breaths together, but in this instance, we've all had a nice laugh together, which does exactly the same thing of connecting us all into a field where we can explore this theme deeply. The first question that we're going to explore is a time when you've helped reconnect something that has become disconnected or forgotten, and what has happened as a result. So Alan, would you like to share first a time in your life or in your work where you've helped reconnect something that had become disconnected or forgotten, and what happened?
Yes. One of the things that Slanglow does is manage the oldest working men's club in Britain. So working men's clubs were formed in the Victorian times, and they were originally community centres owned by the members, owned by the community. So in order to own a part of the club, you pay a £6 membership fee, and then that's you, and you top that up every year. So this thing's been around since 1877, and it's had thousands of owners, and yet this thing has worked for the betterment of all of those people. And when it started, it was a lecture hall and a games room. So it's based on the importance of education and educational nourishment for people who wouldn't otherwise experience it. And very problematically, through the 20th century, they became pubs. And so now they're known as places that you go to play bingo and listen to singing. But actually, where it started from was, it says right at the first line of its constitution, is it is for the spiritual and social health of everybody. And what an amazing thing to have a building in the middle of a community that isn't an act of municipal. It's not a contract by the council. It's actually something that everybody owns, and that's incredibly difficult because there are 432 members of the Holbeck, and they don't agree on anything, and we have to move forward. So I would not call it a working men's club. It's profoundly problematic as a sentence, but the members want to call it a working men's club because they're the oldest one, and they're not the oldest social club, so they don't want to lose that. And actually, that negotiation as a community to say, but it's a really difficult phrase, and some people are saying, well, we don't care about your difficultness. That stuff there is the real marrow of, I think, a strength that this club isn't reliant on me being dynamic, isn't reliant on Slanglow being generous or kind or any of those things. It will outlast all of that. And when we took over as managers a few years ago, it was in decline. The smoking ban and people don't drink in the same way meant that nobody really wants to go and sit and spend £3.50 on a pint of lager in this community. And we, if you're one of the members who loves bingo, then you think that we transformed this into something new, but we know we didn't. We know we just took it back to what it was in 1877. We just missed out the problematic bit where it became a pub. It's still a pub. You can still buy a pint of beer there if you want for £2.80, but it's something else. So when COVID came along, for it to become a food bank, everyone said, innovation! And I was like, it's not innovation at all. It's reconnection. It's looking back. It's not looking forward. That in an age where we're constantly looking, I mean, in theatre, we're incredibly guilty of this, where we're always looking for the new thing. And you're like, well, kind of, lots of what we've been doing has worked a lot. People want to hear stories in their own community. They don't want to necessarily catch a train to London. A lot of the most progressive things that are happening in my sector and my community they're not ancient, but they're historical. And so I suppose that would be my answer to your question, is we reconnected to a time when people felt like members of our community could be trusted to own something together. And it is the only thing I can think of that's still like that. And it is also the oldest thing in our community. 1877, it's the oldest building, and it's the only one that in all of that time has never been taken over by the market. And as a result, it still stands now, and when COVID comes, it rides that storm in a way that all the other businesses shut or changed or went bankrupt. And this old, tired thing went, we just change, we just evolve, and we will become useful in a different way. So that is my reconnection story.
Where is this working men's club?
Holbeck, South Leeds, the land of stories and magic. It is, Holbeck is an inner city ward in Leeds, is amazing in many ways, and for about 5 minutes was the heart of the Industrial Revolution. And since that 5 minutes has been kicked in the balls by every single shift of social movement. So deindustrialization absolutely ruined it. Austerity, Thatcher booted it so hard. austerity has reduced it. It is a victim of the hostile environment. It has an unbelievably large, endlessly moving community as the government keeps trying to move refugees on so they don't get roots. And then COVID came along and just finished off what was left. So that's problematic. But the thing that's left after that is a community that it's like being a glass of water in a desert. Is you find real strength. You find real great gratitude's the wrong word because that implies a kind of imbalance. You find great moments of joy. If you came, we don't have a room like this, but we might have this conversation. We just wouldn't be quite as nice, but we would still find a way to have this conversation. And I think that that spirit in Holbeck's really exceptional, of survival, actually. That's what it is. It's the spirit of survival.
And for our international listeners, Leeds is in Yorkshire.
Yorkshire, north of England. So in the industrial belt on the M62 corridor, and for a long time was during the Victorian times is where you would find factories and mills, and still now you would go and see the crumbling remains, structures of mills that have just fallen down. It has not been gentrified as yet. You can't buy a flat white. It's just a cup of coffee. It's that place. It's a good cup of coffee though.
And what was the process like of the community coming together and the food banks being created and distributed?
It's a story of amazing. We had, so we did it for 16 months. We did 15,202 deliveries, cost £150,000. And it happened in large part because the council asked for it to be happen. So they gave away authority. That was really important. We're not a charity. We're not a social care. We're a group of people who decided that it would be done because it needed to be done. And then to that mission, to that kind of declaration, came hundreds of people, volunteers, who desperately wanted to help. And that is a very wide mix of people. Absolutely, we had volunteers who came from distance in Range Rovers because their moral compass demanded they did, their guilty conscience demanded they did. And we also had people that walked in from next door and would help pack and then go, I'm good to take a food parcel at the end of the day. And we had everyone in between. And actually, it worked because of that. It's true in the arts sector as well, this idea that you only want one of those people for whatever reason. Actually, you need all of those people and everything in between, because otherwise it doesn't have any strength, because there are different times when it's different, when you need to call on those different groups of people. All of that's true, that is the genuine story of the food bank. It is also true that it was incredibly problematic, that the left hated the food bank as much as the right hated the food bank, and it remained criticised to the day we finished. That there were members of the club that tried to get the food bank removed because it was bringing disrepute upon the name of the club, because it implied that the people of the area couldn't afford their own food, which is just an objective fact that they can't. But the idea that it would, and that would stop people coming to buy drinks in the good days, because who would want to go and celebrate in a venue that had been a food bank? Now, I personally think that's exactly where people want to spend their money, and we're finding that that's the case. But it's not. In this day and age, there is no such thing as a morally pure act. Even giving away food is politically incredibly complicated. We don't have time to get into the class politics of whether it's sliced white bread or whether it's a loaf of sourdough from the bakery. But these things are real. These things are complicated, and I think the thing that the club allows over time is a kind of confidence that it's all right to do the right thing, even as people are shouting at you. That maybe I can't even convince all the people in this room that it was the right thing to do, and that's okay, because I know it was. And that will have to do for today.
You can't leave us wondering what kind of bread you chose.
There's a great story there's a brilliant bakery, a cooperative bakery in Leeds. They make the most amazing bread, and they basically did us a great deal where we got this amazing sourdough bread that the marketplace would say was £6, and I don't know, they gave it £2 each. Just get returned. They would just throw it out of the window at us. Fuck off, give us real bread. But the bread wasn't as divisive as the milk. If you try and take anything but blue top milk to Holbeck, they will fight you. They will ring you and call you names. And that's, all joking aside, that's to do with the fact that blue top milk is the full fat, is the slightly more expensive, is the good stuff. So if you take them stuff that isn't that, they think what you're saying is that they're not worth it. And actually that I can get alongside. And there was probably a better education job we could have been done about maybe people shouldn't eat as much sliced white bread as was given us all bowel cancer. But actually, it's to do with worth, and that was really fascinating. And we came a cropper about it a lot.
Thank you. Kim, could you share a time in your life or work?
Sure. I was going to tell a very personal story, but I would like to follow on with what you were saying, Alan, about taking something old and making it appropriate to today. And there's two parts to this. One is indigenous wisdom that had gotten so lost for centuries. But in fact, there's a recognition now that they had a lot right. And the proof is that the ones that are still around had survived for so many centuries. And many have still somehow survived. There's an understanding that they have about the relationship to land, to life, to nature that is more systemic. And they understand that if you exploit one thing, take it out too much, you create an imbalance. And so you need to be very careful about how you're using the resources around you. And so fortunately, this indigenous wisdom is being recognized now. And there's a lot of books that we can learn from these people. And there was actually a very strong representation up in Glasgow where I just was. They're still up there. And they are in the Blue Zone meeting people and sharing their wisdom. So yeah, I appreciate that. And at my organization, Reboot the Future, we're not directly involved in this indigenous wisdom, but we support it. And one of the principles that indigenous people have is about community, caring about their community more than their own ego. And this has been brought out in in every religious faith. It's very ancient principle, and it's sometimes known as the Golden Rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or don't do to others what is hateful to you. And it's such a basic human core. And at Reboot the Future, we are trying to bring that ancient wisdom back to the forefront of how we live our lives, with indigenous peoples being the ultimate representation of that. So we have a modern version of it, which is treat others and the planet as you wish to be treated. In fact, we have the SDGs here as we embrace the SDGs. They're fantastic goals.
Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes, Sustainable Development Goals. The UN, the United Nations goals for 15 years, from 2000 to 2015 to 2030. And so we put the Golden Rule around them, because we can't really fulfill them unless we live the Golden Rule. And the point about this principle is that it's applicable to all the issues of the world, as well as our interpersonal relationships. So you in your community reviving this, and in your food bank, you're answering a need of that moment. You're living it. Living example right here. That would be my biggest global example of reconnection.
Thank you, Kim. And just for those that don't get the reference to Glasgow, that as we are here in Coventry for Change Festival, COP26 is happening in Glasgow right now. And you have just been there for the past week. So you're bringing the energy and the hope from what you've experienced on the fringes of COP. I'm going to ask you to share the personal story that you were going to share. Can you please?
Well, it's, I think we've all faced difficulties in personal relationships, and this was with someone that I deeply loved, and communication broke down terribly, and there was a big disconnect happening, and it was very painful. And we could have just gone on with that, drifting apart, but there was too much at stake, and so it didn't seem right to just let that drifting go on. And I could see the other person was not going to take the responsibility, so I realized I had to take the responsibility. In these sorts of situations, someone has to be first. And so I decided to be the one that would be first, to start asking questions, open up a dialogue. It was a long, slow process, many dialogues, but we finally reconnected. And it was, ultimately the right thing. But someone has to be first, I realize, in all of these situations. And you have to, some harsh things were said before, and you just have to forgive. You have to find a way to forgive. It's super hard because you've been deeply, deeply hurt. But I realized I could not go on with that feeling of being a victim, feeling revengeful, feeling sadness and disappointment. I had to move on, and that required forgiveness.
Thank you for that potent reminder. I feel like that's something that everyone can connect with, because we've all been, or perhaps are, in situations where it goes quiet in a relationship because both people have been hurt and nobody knows how to move forward. And to be that person that forgives, that picks up the phone or turns up and says, let's move past this now because it's more important, and opens up that path of reconnection.
Yes, you can never forget, but you can forgive.
Yeah, and otherwise it can just go on for years, right? These things, and then
I've seen other cases where it has. You think, come on, guys, just get over it. So, somebody has to be first.
Which feels apt on a bigger scale as well as in personal relationships, that with all of the disconnect that we might see in our communities, just like in Alan's example, somebody has to say, okay, we'll do it, and we'll make this happen.
I've just read a beautiful book by Bernadette Russell called something like How to Feel Hopeful. It's a super, super practical book, but it's about stepping up in whatever way you can, whether it's a small way or a big way, to find that situation that needs help, and you can be the one to do it. It's a very good book. Loads of ways of getting involved.
Hannah, you've been here patiently, quiet and listening. Can you share with us a time for you where you initiated a reconnection?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a researcher and I'm a social anthropologist. And I think the main way that I'm practicing reconnection at the moment is through my research. So for those of you that don't know what social anthropology is, because it is quite a small discipline, it's basically the study of people and the communities and the cultures that we create. And I think because of that, quite early on in anthropology as a discipline, there's been a realization that there's no such thing as objective research. You can't go out and study a group of people that you're working with and say that your impression of what you experienced is kind of the truth about the situation. And it's different depending on who you are, because you connect with the people that you're working with and you influence them and they influence you, and the relationships you build shape the work that you produce, and you produce it together. So this is something that's always been, a strong idea within anthropology, or social anthropology at least. But in my research, I tried to take that an extra step further and practice something called activist anthropology, which is the idea that rather than just recognizing these connections between yourself and the people you work with for research, you actually try to use those connections for creating a positive impact. So in a way, you could call it activism, but depends how you want to see it, really. It's just creating a positive impact in people's lives that you're working with. So it's something that I'm studying climate activism, so there's a kind of direct way that I do that through my research. But recently, I've been involved in a research team studying eco-anxiety, which is a kind of term that's arisen recently in the media, but it's essentially this idea of fear and dread that comes from experiences of the climate breakdown. And while we were interviewing people for this research, it was really striking how many of the people we were talking to were saying at the end of the interview, almost as we kind of finished off, like, thank you so much for this chance to talk about it. It's been really, really helpful to just actually have someone to speak about these things with. Like, I don't want to talk about it with my family because it's depressing and no one really wants to hear about it. I don't want to talk about it with my friends, but actually the interviews were only like an hour and a half, but it was a chance to talk about those kind of emotions that people were having. So we thought together as a team that this is a way that our research is clearly influencing other people that we work with. And so we worked with Reboot the Future, which is the organization that Kim founded. And they run something called Conscious Conversations, or Imaginal Conversations. I think it changed its name. And we ran one of these with the group of people that we were studying. So it was a chance for them to speak to each other. And I think a large part of what they were saying as well was that it was that opportunity to be part of research that was about eco-anxiety made them feel like they weren't the only person that had eco-anxiety, because otherwise how could we do this research? Like, obviously it's an issue affecting a lot of people. And the conversation that Reboot run is kind of focusing on helping people to reconnect with their values and reconnect with things that are important to them and speak about these things with other people. So running one of these conversations with our research participants was a really nice way to help the people that we were working with, but also to get really useful research insight. And I think what's important about that is that these things aren't separate. Like, academia isn't something that should be kind of separate and up in this ivory tower where it's just for academics and a very small elite, like highly educated elite, and everyone else, all the normal people, don't get to know about it. It shouldn't be like this. Like, if you're learning about something and that insight is useful, it should be presented in a way that anyone can understand, and it should be used to help people. So that's the way that I try to reconnect, I guess, like the original inspiration that a lot of academics have to do research. It's often from quite personal things, especially in anthropology, because you're studying people. And with me, that's obvious. It's quite clear. I'm studying climate activism because I really care about that. But it's trying to reconnect also your personal reasons for doing the research with the kind of impacts that you have from that research.
That's so interesting. Can you share more about your personal story and what led you to wanting to do this work?
Yeah, so I think how it started for me was actually through my experience of being involved in climate activism. I've been involved in various different types of activism, and I'd been involved in working on environmental issues with various different charities. But it was when Extinction Rebellion, the climate activist movement, when I first found out about them and got involved, that really had a big impact on me. And I was living in London at the time, and there was a 2-week-long Extinction Rebellion protest happening in London. And I hadn't heard about it, but actually the person I was living with was going to it, and so I kind of looked it up on the internet, and I was really excited to see how direct the demands were. It was quite, they were really saying, like, they were quite, I guess you could say, extreme or radical, in a sense that they were asking for like real fundamental change in the way that our society is structured. They were clear that it was about systemic change. So I went along to see what it was like. And I think it was the fact that there were so many people there and that they weren't just there for a few hours, like a normal protest might last for a few hours. People do a march and then it's over. They were there for 2 weeks, blocking roads across London. And for the first time, I felt like I kind of regained a sense of hope that I suppose maybe I had as a kid, perhaps, where you're kind of disintegrated as you learn more about the world and you realise that actually things are a lot more corrupt than you thought, and the world isn't at all fair, and there's all these different problems with it. But being part of that community and realising that actually there's loads of other people that really want to address this issue, and they're willing to go quite extreme lengths to get their voices heard and to spread a message. Like people were sitting in the road for like days on end, people were willing to face arrest. Being part of that was really inspiring, and it kind of made me think about it. It empowered me to make a lot of changes in my life that before I'd felt were kind of maybe a little bit pointless, like as if I was the only person doing it, would it really be worth me making these dramatic lifestyle changes? But when you feel like you're part of a group of people, you're not the only one making those changes, you're adding those changes to this huge community. So it really changed those things for me and kind of enabled me to make a difference. And that's what made me want to go and study that for my PhD as well, to think about how can we make that change even more powerful within activism and use anthropology as a way to understand that.
What were some of those changes that you made?
I guess kind of classic things, like I try to be vegan, but I'm not always vegan. But again, I think that's something that you shouldn't have to be completely vegan or completely vegetarian. You can just do your best at it, and the pressure puts people off. I decided to stop flying, and I just got a lot more involved in activism. Before that, I'd occasionally gone along to things on the weekend, but yeah, I properly embedded myself in it.
And are you still very connected to Extinction Rebellion now?
Yeah, so part of the practice of my research as well is to work with the community that I'm studying. My research is on Extinction Rebellion activism. So I'm studying that this year through engaging in activism and kind of experiencing it through my engagement with it. So it's called participant observation, when you go into a community of people and you learn about it, not by kind of watching from the outsides and like writing notes, but actually partaking in everything that they do, kind of trying to live in the same way that they do in order to understand it and kind of, really get to know people. So I've been quite involved.
Thank you. I'm curious what each of you feel needs the most reconnection in the world right now in terms of issues, and why that particular issue speaks to you, and what radical reconnection might look and feel like.
Yes, I can answer.
Please do, Ken.
I think the most important thing that needs to happen is that everybody connects to their core values. I happen to believe that all humans share a common set of values, and there are a lot of researchers who have gone around the world, done a lot of surveys. We all want to be trusted. We all want to be respected. We all want to have dignified lives. We all appreciate generosity. We actually like to be generous. All these kinds of things are common core values. But in life's daily challenges, we forget about them. And we're actually trained in our educational system to love to compete and be our best, which is good, but sometimes it's at the cost of connection to others and caring about others. It becomes very egotistical if taken too far. There's 3 areas that I was thinking about that really influence this lack of tuning into our core values. And one is politics. This extreme right or extreme left has really separated people from one another, and they've forgotten that they have this actual set of shared values. So how do we get rid of the extremes and help people find, I mean, it used to be in the United States, I'm American by birth, that, Republicans and Democrats both cared about the environment. I remember the first Earth Day in 1971, and the Republicans were really behind this. In fact, some of the great, I believe it was the Clean Air Act, was a Republican initiative. So what has happened? So we all have this core value. We all share this earth. We all need to take care of it. I heard one lonely voice in the United States speak, one Republican saying, hey, wait a second. Conservation is actually a conservative value. I've never heard again from that person. She was completely wiped off the map. So another area is our work culture, and because I have connection through my husband to the corporate world, I meet a lot of people working in large businesses, and I could never survive in a large business because they are so disconnected from their core values. And there's so many books out there trying to help companies at all levels. So many people out there working with these corporate people. I mean, and the worst is the financial industry, because they have one focus, which is money. But this is disintegrating now because people are realizing they need to tune in to their hearts in order to be happy and in their lives. So there's a lot of work going on in that, but it's not enough yet. And then the third area is social media. I don't go on social media, but it seems as if there's just a huge pressure that is put on people with this whole like-dislike system, and young people are so sensitive to it, and we know that girls, adolescent girls, face so many issues about self-esteem, and you're liked or disliked on such superficial qualities rather than who you are as a person. So I would say those three areas there was more, but stop there.
Yeah, I can go. I think what is most in need of reconnection is the idea of how we perceive, like really fundamentally, the idea of how we perceive humanity and nature in the West. And this is kind of the core of my PhD thesis, so I'll try and not go on about it too much. But essentially, it's this idea that in the West, we've had this idea of humanity that at some point humanity evolved beyond the rest of nature and we became more civilized and kind of separate from nature, and distanced from it. And therefore, if you're separate from something, you're not affected by changes in it. So this was quite a convenient narrative because it allowed humanity or certain parts of humanity to exploit nature because it wouldn't touch us, we were disconnected from it, and it wasn't part of us, and we were superior to it, so therefore we deserved to take what we wanted. And this is an idea that isn't just, unfortunately, like something that affects the environment, but it's also a social justice issue because that whole idea of a humanity separate from nature is the same justification that was used for colonialism and is still used. This idea that certain people are more evolved and therefore deserve to go and treat other people and exploit them who are less evolved. And the idea was that this was justified as like, oh, we're helping these people to, become more civilized in quotation marks. And it's also an idea that's been used for the subjugation of women to frame women as closer to nature and more unable to control their emotions, and therefore they can't be like in public facing roles. So therefore, if you look at the UK government, it's mostly male. these ideas are still having a massive influence in our society, even if it's kind of because there's such fundamental narratives that run through how we are brought up, how our education system works, and the way we treat the world and the people that we engage with. So
that was the example of the indigenous
exactly.
wisdom.
Yeah. And I think it ties in exactly with what you were saying about values, because I think in order to challenge that system and this kind of narrative, the only way to really do that is to really reflect on what it is that you value and why. Because these are not necessarily views that people are born with. They're things that you get taught culturally, like it's through the way that education works, through the way that the world of work works. That sounds a bit weird, but all of these kind of things. So yeah, really kind of reflecting on your values, I think, is one of the most powerful ways you can address this kind of issue.
Yeah, just a quick example. I met somebody this week who worked for McKinsey for many years, and they're the big management consulting company, do work globally, and all of the big, any industry, they'll consult with anything, no question about what they do. And finally, he just couldn't take it anymore, because they were advising the oil industry to, do whatever they do. And then on the other hand, they were advising a university to start a climate thing. And so it was just no consistency whatsoever, and no core values about, they just worked, take the money and make a profit and, consult. So he quit and has devised his own program. They charge a lot of money, these companies. So he's devised a whole new system. And his goal is to disrupt this whole management consulting system. And he told me that people are leaving Accenture and McKinsey and these Deloitte by the droves, it was his word, because there's no relationship to their core values. So it's happening, but it's a difficult process. It takes courage. It takes a lot of courage.
Empathy. I think that's the heart of all of this. Empathy is imagination in action. And we have diminished imagination and creativity for a very long time, in large part because the market doesn't need it very much. We only need a few famous artists to buy their things. We don't need lots. We don't need everyone to have creativity, because it makes them easier to work in chicken farms or whatever we're making them do this with. So I think the key to all of this, and I agree with all that, like our civic discourse is horrendous, and it's not just on social media, it's just horrendous. And in order to change that, we need to imagine what the person who I disagree with, why they would possibly be disagreeing with me. And in order for that to happen, I have to empathize. I have to understand why she disagrees with me. I have to. And if we don't get that, we'll just continue to shout louder and louder. And in the end, the people with the loudest voices will win. And they're nearly always some of the most stupidest men. So empathy, I think. Imagination and action. That's my answer.
Thank you. There's a recurring theme around our education system and our culture of, our education system based on a colonial capitalist model to train us to be a certain way. And also it feels important to bring into a conversation about reconnection, spirituality, or a sense of connecting to something bigger than oneself. And again, what has happened with religion is that some of that actual essence has been stripped out, and a nature-based spirituality of even just being able to walk outside in the morning and put your bare feet on the ground and look up at the sky and feel a connection and a gratitude for being here on earth and being alive. Like, it doesn't have to be this big thing. It can just be a very simple thing where we experience ourselves in connection to something bigger within ourselves, and in connection to each other, and in connection to the earth.
Yeah, I think that's that idea of yeah, like almost a spiritual practice, but without necessarily the religious aspect of it is really interesting. And I think that's almost what drew me to activism as well, because it provides that sense of, in many ways, it provides a lot of the things that religion traditionally provided. It provides you with a community, with support, with a kind of group of people with shared ideas. But often, I mean, actually you get religious activism too, but it's often not religious in the environmental context. And I think that idea of reconnection as well is something that has been like a consistent theme, especially when I was talking to people with eco-anxiety, and they were saying the things that they found that were helpful for them, similar to me, was engaging with other groups of people and finding other people that shared their views, but also spending time in nature. That was something that it's that part of feeling that you're part of something bigger, that you're not just you alone trying to do something, and actually you're not solely responsible either. But you wouldn't be able to change anything just by yourself, but because you're part of something bigger, you're able to change things together.
Thank you. I want to open it up to our audience, but there's a really beautiful sign on a wall here that says, "There is no audience, everything is real," which we've been walking past every day here at Change Festival. Are there any questions? We've got time for one or two. If anyone has a question around reconnection that they'd like to ask. Holly, do you have a question by any chance?
Holly?
Dion, do you have a question?
Dion has lots.
Can you ask your question? It needs to also go into my mic, doesn't it?
No, it needs to go into that mic.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. Okay, I'll come close. Oh, sorry, a little bit. Forgot the dangly bit. Okay. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Dion Ellis-Taylor. Kim, I'm here for this talk because of you and that amazing book that you put together, Imaginal Cells, transformational for me. And I've bought as many copies as Amazon would allow me to buy and sent it to everyone I know. Is it available through a different source? Do I need to buy it through Amazon?
Yes, we took it off Amazon because we had kind of a bad experience with them. It's we can order it from our website. Do we have some copies here?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Yeah, we have copies here. We will see Alice afterwards.
So is it published through Reboot?
Yes, you can order copies through rebootthefuture.org. There's a page on there to order the book, and we'll ship it anywhere.
It's so useful. I've sent it to accountants, bishops, archdeacons, vicars, accountants
thank you.
mainly, people in finance.
Thank
Pointing them to
you.
the middle chapters, because it's bookended, isn't it, with
Yes.
compassion, but in the middle it deals with economy, hardcore green economy, circular economy. What a fantastic publication! Need to get it in on everybody's desk.
Oh, well, thank you
I think
very
so.
much for that endorsement. I was just with Bill McDonough last night, who started the circular economy. We're in close touch with quite a few of the authors, actually, and they're just incredibly beautiful people, still doing great things. So yeah, thank you very much.
And in terms of reconnection, what this question or comment brings up is the reconnection needed in how we buy and publish our books, and how it's become even more exasperated, the Amazon issue during COVID. Well, both Amazon issues. The one with the individual that's got it incredibly rich during this pandemic from the way in which we're buying and selling things, and all of the issues for the employees of Amazon that are timed to the point where they go to the toilet in plastic bottles, because there's not actually time for them to make a living and go to the toilet whilst they're at work. So there's a huge thing that needs to be reconnected there. And then, of course, in the Amazon rainforest, where there are so many indigenous that have been killed during the past year and a half for protecting their rainforests. And so we need a big reconnection there, because the work that they do is for all of us humans. We are all breathing the same air, and we all need the Amazon rainforest to be alive and well, and not sold off. Is there another question from the audience? Alice?
Alan, I just wanted to ask you a bit more about your working men's club that's not a working men's club. So is it a CBS or a CIC?
No, so being a working men's club is a legal status that you can no longer have. So if you have it, you can't. If you give it away, you can't go back. Right. So when we moved in, we did something which was so the working men's clubs have a specific drinks license. This is important, I promise. Which means that two things. Number one of which, you can gamble in a different way. So you can gamble a lot higher. It doesn't. There's new gambling rules to stop people becoming addicted. Yeah, that doesn't count in working men's clubs. You can just keep smashing the crack. And then the other thing is that you have to know who's in the building, which is where the membership comes from. So in the working men's club, say we were all members here. In the old days, you wouldn't all be members because you were all women, so you're definitely not allowed. That's the beginning of the problems. But so say you were all my guests, I would have to sign you all in. And that meant that it was really easy to stop different types of people coming into the club. So the club we inherited still almost had that system. So we changed the pub license, with the drinks license, to be a pub. So actually it's protected in law. If you wanted to come into the club, you have to be allowed. It's the law. If not, you could sue the club and you could own the club because it didn't have much money. So these legal things are really important because it meant that we're still open. We're still owned by the members, and it's really important we serve everybody. But that everyone has to include all of us. And so we did a little naughty thing there with the license, which meant that the first week when we first took over, it was like, she can't come in. She's not. I was like, actually, not only can she, there's a legal imperative for you to welcome her, lest you get your bottom smacked. And so these things were important. So the working men's clubs are a legal status that you can no longer get, but it gives you some privileges in law and allows you to circumvent some of the protections that we've put in place for protected characteristics and also gambling and stuff like that. So we're a pub that has never rescinded its working men's club. So the idea is when we leave, they could go back to being a working men's club. There are reasons why we would never leave, but
I see. And then, so does it just work financially through the things that you sell?
No.
Do you get grants from places?
So we're an entirely pay what you decide operation. The only thing that isn't pay what you decide is a beer, because we're like not idiots. But we're a community and theatre space. So we put on a show every week. That's pay what you decide. All the box office for everything we do goes to the visiting artists, and we are funded by the Arts Council. There's some other things that we paid off all the debts when we moved in because we wouldn't, as a group of 4 people, as a kind of, we're not quite collective, but as close to collective as you can be, we wouldn't be somewhere in debt. So we also guarantee the club against debt every year. So at the end of every year, the 31st of December, we settle all their debts. This year, that will be £47,000 because the running costs of a 200-seat cabaret space, 4 or 5 offices, number of meeting rooms and 2 bars in COVID, in one of the poorest areas in the north of England, in a large population of Muslims and a number of other people who do not want to come and buy beer. It is impossible for that pub to make a living. So on the one hand, everyone goes, oh my God, £47,000. It's a lot of money. It's really cheap rent. It's really cheap rent. And when you think that building with all it's on 3 floors, there's a flat artists who and all sorts of journalists, all different types of people who come to the city who couldn't afford a hotel, now stay in that place for free. There's English as a second language classes, there are arts workshops, there are family groups, there are kids. All of those people use that space for £47,000 a year. Bargain. And so it's a rare thing that everybody gets what they want. And one of our core values is everybody gets what they want, but nobody gets to stop other people getting what they want. So if your hill that you're willing to die on is you want to pay £2.50 for a pint of bitter and do bingo on at 8 o'clock on Sunday, it is my job to leverage all the cultural capital I can to make sure that is the case. However, and that will happen. However, when you come to me and you say, I don't like those people upstairs, whoever they might be, whether it's a queer cabaret or Ghanaians or it doesn't matter who they are, I go, dude, you got what you wanted. And you can keep adding to that list. It's not a one. You keep coming to me and say, but what you cannot do, what I will not take seriously is, but I don't want them to go, shh, hush cupcake, you get nothing. What do you want? I want this. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, but I don't want, no. Everybody gets it. So we're the home now to a community football club, to queer cabarets, to the Leeds United gay supporters group, to a massive Danish and Norwegian football fans. It doesn't matter. If you have need of that space, it's yours. And that, it sounds so simple, doesn't it? It's like my 5-year-old boy gets it. Everybody gets what they want, but you don't get to stop anybody else getting what they want. That's the culture war. That isn't just a frontier. That is a hand-to-hand trench in the culture war, making sure that sentence stays true at all times. That's the business.
I suppose the reason for my question was because from a reconnection point of view, I'm just starting a project for a food hub, but to borrow the money and then make the money back, we need £1 million. And if you borrowed that money, you just wouldn't be able to make that money unless you became a very elitist food hub, which was only selling foods to the middle and upper classes. So my sort of question with reconnections, the real difficulty is in the world that we live in now is how do you make reconnection financially or stable? And not necessarily financially stable, but stable. And it does require so much input from people without expecting a financial return. But even then, there's still the bills to pay, like you said. Even with your cheap rent, it's still very difficult to make it work.
Sorry, am I?
No,
good. Wait, so we're a theatre company, and we make theatre all over the place. And the thing we've reconnected is we're storytellers. So we could make money. We're very good at openings and closings. So we do big ceremonial stuff, and we could just do that and basically become a fireworks company. But if we reconnect with the idea that actually what we are really just traveling balladeers, we're just people who tell stories, then all of a sudden it all starts to make a bit more sense. So what the Slumlow model is to leverage cultural capital. So I sit and go, and I've made a show in Buckingham Palace and all of that stuff, and leverage that and all the financial gains that can be got from doing that work, and then put it into Holbeck. So, for example, we have a company wage. We all get paid the same. We've worked with Patrick Stewart. He got paid the same. I get paid the same as any single person who works for Slumlow, and it's the average wage of the nation. So the people in Holbeck think it's 30 grand. So I get 30 grand to run a pub, and they're like, oh my God, that lad's a duke. I don't know another artistic director in this country who has a full-time job operating at the level we operate on £30,000. And that disconnection there is a knife fight in a trench in the culture war. We have artists quite reasonably saying, we're so underfunded and the minute we went from being a theatre company to a food bank, we became the best funded food bank in our city. And we're one of the smallest funded theatre companies. Now that's mad. That is nuts. It is nuts that my professional board tells me constantly I need to be paid more money because I'm not taking myself more seriously, and I get paid the average wage of the nation, and I cannot afford to go to theatre. That is nuts. Those discrepancies, this is a reconnection with actually what's the truth. I'm a storyteller. I'm going to stand in a pub in South Leeds and I'm going to tell a story. And during COVID, the story was everyone in Holbeck and Beeston will not go hungry. And that story cost us £150,000 to tell for a year and a half. My last big show, I spent more than £150,000 on it. That disconnect is obscene. That disconnect. And for us, as a group of little Ewoks, trying to basically get away with it, we can drive a very environmentally unfriendly juggernaut right through the middle of that. But we've got to do something about that. So I think that's the reconnection is how do you take the thing that we think is for something else and use it for the thing you want? And the club is the best example we have of that.
Thank you so much, Alan. And bringing up that disconnect that's there in the economy with trying to actually do anything that is outside of just going to work, doing your job, coming home, with The Future is Beautiful, we did a live gathering recently. It only worked because
I just worked on it for free. And if I didn't do that, it wouldn't be possible, because if it cost the amount that it actually cost to put it on and to pay me and an assistant so I didn't burn out, then the people that were coming wouldn't have been able to afford to come.
Yeah.
And so so then as somebody that is a cultural activist that just wants there to be more culture and more spaces of reconnection and ways to reconnect, we often just have to do it. You just do it, you make it happen. As long as there's enough to pay your bills, then you make it happen. Not everyone wants to live like that. I think some of us just accept that that's more important than other things. Like a pension. I've got to think about that though at some point.
Don't say pension. You give me chest pain when you say pension. Whoa, it's okay. It's okay. I'll breathe. It's okay. So I'm back in the room.
Well, yeah. My father died last year. He was always on at me about like a pension. I'm like, well, I'm still just working out how to make enough money to live now.
Yeah.
So like,
Just trying to pay the bills.
But then after he died, I did sort of go, oh yeah, what's that longer term plan? And yet I also find myself being called to what's here and what's present, and the work that's needed to be done. And so, yeah, it's an interesting aspect around all of these things, because activism and culture and bringing people together, events, all of this costs money. And more of it's being cut in terms of government funding. There are people that have connections to people with big pockets and they manage to do things that way. That doesn't always get to the most interesting and needed work. And so, how do we begin a reconnection with this?
Well, we spend 500 million pounds worth of public money on arts in this country. So that's what the Arts Council give away. We just spent 3 times that in CRF, in Cultural Recovery Fund. So we just pumped £2 billion into the culture. Now, I don't know, wherever you guys are, in Holbeck, the children didn't see any of it. The kids who don't have crayons live in a city with an opera company, a ballet company, a theatre company within 2 miles, and you would not know it. We could walk around my community and you're not going to see posters for any of that. So there's another reconnection right there. I completely agree in everything you said, is that the systems are broken. But I think there are 2 types of different people. There are mission people and sustain people. So in the food bank, we used to say, we just need to get the food out. And we were just praying, and we're like, this isn't sustainable. And I was like, it not being sustainable is never a good enough reason not to do something today. We've got the finger in a dam, and we've got to hope someone upstream is doing something really clever. Now, it turned out they weren't doing anything really clever. They were just being rubbish. But and the food bank and that whole area of kind of more active social justice was new to us. But in cultural activism, we've been doing it for decades. And our job is to try and fix the problem that presents itself right in front of us and then shout about it. So like, pay what you decide. When we did that first 10 years, I remember someone walking in from the local funder and saying, you're naive little fuckers. And I was like, there's some things worse than being naive little fuckers. Now, there is not a single subsidised theatre in this country that isn't experimenting in some way with pay what you decide. And 10 years ago, it was like the most radical act of anti-capitalism you could come up with. And I was like, well, I think we should just try harder, but okay. And so the hope is that there are some smart people at DCMS, maybe. There are some smart people at Arts Council, definitely, who are like, hang on a minute, we need to make a change. We need to, and now it isn't probably going to be quick enough for me and you. We're dying without pensions, and I think we both know that.
It's okay, because humanity might be wiped out. So.
Well, there's also I didn't realise we were being optimistic tonight. Yeah, absolutely. But the hope
that's
is
our retirement plan.
And you look at the move in cultural democracy, and you look in the move in localism that is attached to the environmental issue, but is kind of grounded in this idea of a culture that doesn't involve us all going to London or all going to the big house and not all being Victorian. And there is change. It's just, it only happens when people like us get really angry and kick it up the hill. And people like you go to a place and put your body on the line, and then in 10 years' time, all these idiots getting out and dragging people off the road, in 10 years' time, everyone will just accept that they were wrong. And now we're having like, I've got a column about it. No, you don't, man. You're just wrong. Shush. These things take time, and I think that we are seeing some changing. I'm incredibly optimistic about the way that culture is changing. I am an oik, look at me. And yet people like me and me sit and have conversations about cultural democracy with government in a way, this government, for fuck's sake, in a way that would have been impossible 30 years ago. Maybe they're having me on, but they're still putting the energy into having me on, and they wouldn't have bothered 20 years ago, but they just ignored me. So change is happening. It just happens really slowly, and it's only fueled by our clarity around our values, our core values, and our fury at the injustice of it all. And that will definitely put me in a grave early. And that's my solution for the pension problem. Boom! That's a circular economy. It's not a circular. Damn it! Came close though, didn't we? Came close to having it all. It is.
There's now a system of entombment that actually decomposes your body and puts you back into the soil very directly.
I'm going to be beautiful compost. I'm going to be such good compost.
You might come back as a tree.
Look at me, I'm already a tree. I'm huge. See, that's not going to work in podcast, dude. Yeah. I'd like to come back as an oak. Is that okay? I'd like to put in a request.
God has heard you, whatever God is.
Yes! Enjoy my shade. Oh, go enjoy my shade. Yes.
I would like to invite each of you to share some top tips. Let's keep dying off the list for this part of the conversation, for how we can rise up to reconnect for all our friends listening, so that they can be inspired to reconnect in their lives and in the bigger picture of the future that we're co-creating. And I would like for you to share also how people can connect with you, so relevant websites and social media, so that the conversation can be continued. Kim, you look ready.
You're ready. You're ready.
How to reconnect? I think, just be the first person to go find someone else. And as Hannah was saying, at Reboot the Future, we've have this series of imaginal conversations, and we get small groups of people together to just talk about things that are serious and important, and to reach our hearts. And that is the deepest connection that can be made. And we've developed actually a system with we got a grant from M&S to do some conversations with their loyalty customers. And it's very interesting because we have these cards, and you pick out these questions. They're about climate, about fashion, about food, just to get to increase awareness of these issues, because not everybody really understands how to think about it, or how to just keep it away. I don't want to deal with it. But these questions help us learn how to deal with it. And so it's just an example of how, in a simple way, you can have conversations that are meaningful, that trigger you to think deeper, and just be the first. Reach out, find somebody to have a conversation with, or do something with. Is my simple answer.
And what URLs would you like to share for continuing the conversation?
I'm sorry?
URLs, websites, social media.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, rebootthefuture.org is the website. So I think that's the best place to kind of start from. And then, there's contact information on there, so you can just send an email, and we're all there looking at the emails, so happy to reply.
Excellent. So Hannah, what's your call to action for how we can rise up to reconnect?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this because I think it's really difficult. Like, we've been talking about this kind of balance between at a certain level you do need to be like financially sustainable, but also there's no point being financially sustainable if there's no future, and this can lead to this kind of tension where you end up almost just in a like state of depression, like, oh, I can't do anything, what's the point? I can't have a pension, I also can't have a future, then it can be like really heavy and very difficult to know where to begin. But I think the idea of reconnection is something that's really helpful with this, because if you do kind of change how you see the world and you recognize that every person in the world, but also every living being and non-living things as well, are part of an ecosystem and we're all connected, then even the things that you can't change immediately or directly, like, I don't know, say you want to buy like an ethical mobile phone, it's just impossible. You can't do that. Like, they don't exist. There's one that's the most ethical one that anyone has ever created, and even they said it's not ethical and it's really expensive. So, and I don't think it works yet. So there you go. But you do need to have a phone as well, so you're caught in this dilemma. But I think, yeah, with things like this, it's important to recognize that you can actually address those things, like, because everything is connected, even if you just have a conversation with somebody about the climate crisis or about a social justice issue or something, that can have like a ripple impact onto other people, and it can create like changes built from these kind of incremental small changes that build on top of each other and eventually create big change. It's not like a sudden switch that happens. So I think recognizing the importance of those small actions, as well as, like, you know, activism isn't just like sitting in the road and gluing yourself to things. It's also talking to people, like if it's even in your family or like friends that you know, or just trying to open up conversations that don't, without like kind of telling someone off or telling them that they're wrong, because that always shuts everything down. That's really unhelpful. But kind of, yeah, just making space to kind of discuss ideas, I think, is one of the most powerful things you can do. And like Kim was saying, the conversations that Reboot the Future run are really a good place for that. Like, I went to one the other week, and I kind of know how they run because I had helped organize a few, but I hadn't been part of one before. And it was so inspiring. Like, I had a bit of a like rubbish week. I've been trying to look for grants for a PhD on activism, which no one wants to fund. And then just going to that and being able to talk to other people who like shared these different ideas, and people were really, yeah, they had really good values, and it was really inspiring. So I think, yeah, these kind of things can have a really strong impact on people.
Did you find funding for your PhD?
I'm in the process, still looking, but we'll see. Yeah.
And how would you like people to contact you? Through Reboot the Future or separately? And we have lots of people listening that are part of Extinction Rebellion. So if you have an ask for people to get in touch with you around specific aspects of your research, then please also share that.
Okay. I think the best way to contact me is probably my email address. But it's hdf1@standrews.ac.uk. But yeah, if you just like Google Hannah St Andrews, Hannah Fitchett St Andrews, then my profile comes up, and it's all my contact details are on there. Yeah, I would love to hear from people. And yeah, I would also really love to hear from people in XR. So part of my research is interviewing XR activists just about their experiences of involvement in activism, what that's meant to them, and whether that has kind of impacted their ideas of their place in the world and their worldview. So yeah, anyone that wants to talk about that with me, I'm more than happy to hear from them.
Thank you. Alan, how can we rise up to reconnect?
Be useful, be kind, and there was a really good podcast the other day called Sparked on Radio 4. They were talking about interrogation, and they said waterboarding people doesn't work, but neither does giving them a biscuit and a cup of tea. Rapport is the thing that works. And I think that's empathy, it's imagination in action. The person, there aren't any such thing as evil people. If they are, they don't exist in our world. They're not worried about Warwick University or somewhere. They're smuggling guns somewhere or doing something. They're just people who have choices they haven't found a way to connect with you yet. Rapport, I think, is the key. Otherwise, in this culture war, we're going to lose. I sit in the club. I'm a reserve officer in the army as well. I sit with people outside of my political and social bubble all the time, and we will lose. We will lose because their answers are simpler, they're easier, and they don't involve spending a lot of money on a phone that doesn't work. They just got simpler answers, so we're going to have to find a way to have a discussion with them that doesn't make them evil. And report. To be useful, be kind, report. And how you get hold of me is slunglow.org. All the emails there just come through to my phone. I can be got at alan@slunglow.org, or I am often found on Twitter being needlessly furious about everything at slunglow alan. Or I post a lot of very wholesome content about my boy, which I think is pretty much my only optimistic bone in my body. So.
I think you've got more bones in your body that are optimistic than you think to be doing the work that you're doing. For anybody that is present here or listening that would like to reconnect, rise up to reconnect by donating large sums of money to Hannah's PhD research or
please.
mine and Alan's pension funds, please do get in contact at connect@thefutureisbeautiful.co. And that sounds like a joke, but it's actually not. And
It's deadly serious.
Jonathan Porritt was saying recently that we need to get involved in direct action, and if we are not getting involved in direct action because it's just not something that we're able to do for so many reasons. It could be time, it could be disability, it could be all kinds of reasons. He was saying this to the wonderful Becky Birchall, who is the producer of Change Festival. Then one real way is to donate money to support those that are. And unfortunately, we do live in a capitalist society, and everything costs money, and time is money, as they say. So the people that are doing things to bring culture alive, to create connection, that are taking part in direct action, do need support. And yes, to rapport. Yes, they also generally accept tea and biscuits, even though it's not the most effective thing. But supporting and sponsoring individuals that you know is more useful than you can imagine, because it's a disconnect that exists very strongly in this work. And I was hosting a talk at the Weave, which was the gathering that we held at Embercombe, and Ronan Harrington was saying that often people that are doing this work, there's a disconnect in their own lives. Like maybe they don't live somewhere stable. Maybe they can't afford to start a family and be able to do their work. I know that's something that comes up for me, that I can only pay my bills by working extreme hours because my work isn't that useful to capitalism. And so how would I be a mother and do that work is a question that I'm constantly asking myself when people, suggest, oh yeah, just do it. And then you're like, I don't understand how I would be able to do that. And so I share that as a personal example, but we've all got different versions of that. And in order to do this work, many people do live with a lot of like instability, and that real focus on the present in terms of what can be done, and the future in terms of big visions, but maybe not their own future in terms of the economics. And so those calls for support and funding are real and genuine, and there's so many people that you could donate to, and I know that I would be very happy to put you in touch with lots of people, as I'm sure Change Festival would, as I'm sure Hannah's got many contacts within Extinction Rebellion that need support. And I'm sure everyone, Kim and Alan, also know people that could benefit from that level of reconnection. So thank you, everybody, for coming here, for being part of this, for listening, for your questions. And let's rise up to reconnect. Thank you.